Judy, can you hear us? She looks frozen.
Yeah, I think she may have froze.
There she is.
Judy, can you hear us?
Judy, can you hear us?
Now I can. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Great.
okay. Yeah, now we can.
Yes.
All
You're
right,
good.
thank you. Okay, well, Ty, Judy, I will pass it over to you guys.
I'm sorry. You guys, I was kind of messed up with this other meeting. I don't have the agenda. Can you lead, Ty?
Sure. Okay, calling us to order. I know you don't have the agenda, but do you approve it, Judy?
Well, I sure. What the heck?
I promise you, it's a really good agenda.
Can someone please send it to me again? So
Yeah. Let me forward it to you. Hold on. Judy.
I looked at it. It looked good when I looked at it.
Yeah, I just sent it to your berkeley.net.
Okay. So go ahead and start.
Okay, so we'll approve the agenda, right?
Yes.
Okay. Approval of minutes. Did we get the minutes?
I didn't see the minutes.
So I know Carol has been working on them. I don't know if she was able to get them out. I know they are forthcoming if not. So if you guys have not received them, you may just want to waive the approval and we can approve them at the next meeting.
Okay, we'll skip. Yeah, we'll skip that. Okay, now we have public comment. So whoops.
Shanita. Just kidding.
Shanita. I see Rob Collier is here. Rob, do you have public comment?
No, I don't. Thank you. I believe Vicky Davis does, but she's having a hard time logging on here.
Okay, well,
we can tell you when she comes.
Yeah, we can be pretty informal. Okay. All right, so next is update from Executive Director of Facilities. That sounds like John.
Yeah, so I'll hold for a few minutes on Longfellow if that's okay, just because I'm not sure what Vicky Davis is coming in for, but I know Paco Furlon is going to be joining us around 1:15. So I will jump to 5.2 architectural services update. Historically, Berkeley Unified, we always have pools, and the pools are for our architects and for our engineers, our CEQA, our environmental folks, et cetera. With the passage of Measure G, we put out an RFQ for our architectural pool as well as for CEQA, and we'll be doing one for our CM firms as well. Our architectural one was the first one to close. We had a total of 37 applicants. And where we landed is we had 3 readers who went through them. All of the existing architects in our pool, which is 8, actually scored really high, and we do have good history with them. We've advanced them to actually remain in the pool. And then we wound up interviewing a total of 20 architectural firms this past week. Of those, the interviews, it was definitely a long week, and I thank Shanita for hanging in there with me. It was a lot of Zoom time, but we did go through our interviews, and our intent right now is to bring to the board our recommendation at the next board meeting. We don't want the pool to get so big that it's not manageable or that folks lose interest. So our intent is to keep our original 8 that were in that pool and advance another 4 into it to have an architectural pool of 12 architects total. Additionally, there is another set or 2 other sets of architects that we have not interviewed yet. One is landscape architects, where they're only landscape and nothing more. And then the other is architects who actually specialize in parking structures. We'll be interviewing them next week, and then we intend to bring those as well. CEQA, the RFQ for CEQA just closed, so we've had 8 applicants to become CEQA consultants for the district. For those that don't know, that's the California Environmental Quality Act. So we will be reading those RFQ responses, looking at the SOQs, and then interviewing as needed and bringing that recommendation to the board either early or mid-November. Lastly, Our CM firm is excellent. We've got a really good relationship with Van Pelt, and their pricing is good. But that being said, we want to be fair. So we are going to release an RFQ for construction managers as well. And we will, again, read the responses of the RFQs, look at the statement of qualifications, perform interviews, and then bring forth to the board recommendations of either one or more multiple CM firms to work with the district as we launch Measure G. So that's where we stand on that. 5.3, while we're waiting for Mr. Furlong to join, I wanted to talk real quick with the subcommittee about an idea on how we award soft costs. One of the things that I've noticed since I've come to the district that happens is a lot of time consent calendar is pretty jammed up with small items from facilities, and they're really items that are sort of in the minutia, the weeds of operations. The other problem with the way that we currently award the soft costs is we only award these contracts for, let's just say, geotechnical services is a perfect example. And it starts out as a very small $20,000 contract. And based on the findings, then there's a modification 1 and a modification 2. And many times what you'll see go to the board is mod 5. And like we just had one with CTS where mod 5 had a greater value than mods 1 through 4 combined. And the reason that that happens is because of what they find when they're going through. Typically, the problem with that is 1, we jam up the consent calendar, but 2, I believe we actually damage transparency to a certain perspective, because from the community's perspective, they're trying to track what we're spending on soft costs, and it's so hard to keep track of what mod it is, what contract it is, et cetera. One way to actually improve this is we have a soft cost budget allotted for each project, which is usually in the 30 to 35% range. What I would actually like to do is start when we bring the project to the board for authorization and we say, okay, this project is going to be X amount of dollars, 35% of that is going to be soft costs. And these are the 5, the 6, whatever it may be, consultants that we intend to award soft costs to. From that point, receive the authorization from the board. And that way, internally, we can award those mods as we need to. We always stay within that percentage just because some contracts you'll have higher geotechnical services, other you'll have higher abatement services. There's always that fluctuation within, but we always manage to stay within that percentage. But by doing this, it's very transparent to the community, because what we're saying is for whatever that contract dollar amount is, X percentage is going to the soft costs, not hard construction costs. And these are the firms that that's awarding it to. The other way to do it would be to overbook the contracts. But where that's problematic is if I have a consultant give me a $100,000 contract and experience tells me that it's going to cost maybe 150, if I pre-authorize it to the board for 150, that consultant is going to know that, and they're already going to be looking for a way to spend those dollars. Whereas by doing it as the percentage, it just allows us to sort of change how we're able to expedite the things done in construction, but it's also a lot more transparent from the community's perspective. And when we bring the notice of completion to the board, what we could do at that point is then even say, okay, here's the notice of completion. The project came in on budget. This was total. And we can actually then highlight what each one of those consultants cost us throughout. I'd like to receive a little bit of feedback today, if I can, from you guys, just to see if that's something you're interested in doing. I think it's a much more efficient, but more importantly, a much more transparent way of doing things.
I just have to say, I'm so excited to see Paco Furlong.
Great to see you, Paco.
Hey, Paco.
Hey, so excited to see all of you as well.
Your timing is perfect. Everything I said was just totally overdone by Paco joining the room.
I know.
No, you know what, John? That makes total sense to me. I know I will not be on the board probably when it comes up in front of the board, but it makes, anything you do to make things more transparent and kind of conform more closely with what's actually happening, I think is positive.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess when you said jamming up the consent calendar, that didn't really particularly resonate with me. I don't think it matters. We could have 1,000 things on the consent calendar and it's fine. So I don't think that's
When I
really,
say that, what I'm thinking about though, Ty, is when the consent calendar grows so long, I ask myself the question of, when folks get to page 2, do they keep reading, right?
It's
So
never
I
that.
just wanted,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
just
never-
trying to do my part of keeping what I have to put forth to you guys at a minimum to be efficient, but
Yeah.
also just to be more transparent.
well, I appreciate that. I think Judy's right. It doesn't get that long. And just as one board member, I would tell you not, my view would be not worry about that.
Okay.
Put whatever you need to on the consent calendar.
Yeah, I mean, and can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
Tom?
Of course.
I think I hadn't understood from what you were saying that this was at the expense of bringing this to the board, bringing items to the board, because I think that actually public, like making all of the details of projects public is actually a positive thing, because I think
Well, I agree.
facilities are our biggest expense. And I think, we don't want to do I would not support doing something that's gonna, limit the amount of information that's made public. But I didn't understand that from you. I just thought how it's going to be presented is going to be different.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't change the amount of information that we're putting forth, Judy. What it is it's really just saying, because right now, the way the contracts get put forth and then all the different contract mods, the public has to be really savvy to understand what's being spent on soft costs, what's hard construction, and they have to try to track that across multiple projects. Whereas what we would be doing, saying up front, is okay, for project A, we're anticipating 35% of soft costs of this $10 million budget, let's just say. And these are the 5 consultants that those soft costs will be spread out amongst. So that way we're not bringing all these different contract mods back and forth and making it confusing to be tracked.
It's fine with me.
Makes
That
sense.
sounds good. Yeah. All right. Do you want to move to Longfellow? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Actually, can I ask you a question in your report? I'm a little confused. The mental health facility that is across from the Berkeley, from the adult school, actually from Berkeley BTech, does that belong to us or does that belong to the city?
Oh, Judy, I can answer that question. Actually, that does belong to the city of Berkeley. And I know we had some dialogue and back and forth. And I believe the city sounds like they're planning to do some construction work on that space.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to, that's what I think I understood in the end of all those conversations, but I wanted to. All right. So now we can move on to Longfellow.
Yes, that's a quick sidebar.
Quick sidebar. Right.
All
I was
right,
trying to
thank
put
you.
it into the agenda, so I said, as a part of your facilities report.
Okay,
No problem.
thanks.
So we had, myself and Principal Furlon have had some really good conversation about the construction or the upcoming construction for Longfellow. And one of the concerns that Principal Furlon voiced, and I'll definitely, Paco, please feel free to jump in anytime. It really resonated with me because it was similar to mine. We reacted at the board's request of saying, okay, here is, some of the easier projects that we can get done in a quicker time frame. And this is a rough idea of what it's going to cost. And it came out to 10 million. And the board, rightfully so, listening to your constituents, said, okay, yes, get this done. The problem is that it's a lot of money and it doesn't necessarily, as I understood it from my lens, but also from Principal Furlon's lens, it doesn't necessarily represent the greater good of the school community. I don't know that Principal Furlon has really had an opportunity to engage with the entire community. I know I have not. So where we are in the process, I'll tell you there, and then we'll move to the suggestion. So where we are in the process is just that now that we're finalizing the architectural pool, and as I said, that'll be coming to the board here, the first board meeting in November, we intend to award the project to one of those architects within the pool and immediately begin working with Principal Furlon and his staff to create a series of community engagement meetings to really talk about what the needs of the community are, what the needs of the school is through Principal Furlon's eyes and through the vision of where he wants to take that school, ensuring that it aligns with the district standards and the board's vision and mission, right? And then kind of seeing where that gels out, not necessarily just saying we're going to replace all the gates and all the fences and the field. It's not to say that we wouldn't do that, but we believe that it's definitely a more transparent and definitely a fairer process to really get some better buy-in from the community. Principal Furlon, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. So I just first off want to say that basically what John has said, I agree with what he said. And John and I met early on, I think within my first week of being on site in principal here at Longfellow, and talked about sort of where things have gone so far and some of his excitement about going forward and also some of his concerns, which I shared. And I saw a little bit of this over the email train while I was on sabbatical in Barcelona, and I very purposefully stayed out of it. And I know there was a small constituency of a few parents here, a few staff here, and one parent from over at Mendez that really pushed on moving some of this forward. And I really appreciate all those folks and their advocacy. And I appreciate that we have this money. I think as a new principal coming in, this is just a wonderful place to start. But I have talked to staff, and first off, I've hired 30% of the staff this year. So to say that there's been a staff buy-in process is incorrect, because 30% of the folks were not here, including the assistant principal and myself, and then 30% of the staff. And then the general line staff were not brought into any kind of process because this happened pretty late. And so they really have not had a chance to weigh in on what they would like for the school. And there hasn't been any kind of a community process. And then parents even less so. The PTA has not been engaged here at Longfellow in any kind of a way. There's not been a PTA meeting set aside to talk about facilities. And I really feel like, having been through the $500,000 remodel at Rosa Parks and gone through the community engagement process there and the back and forth with staff and putting together our parent and staff committee and working with the architect, we came up with an incredible plan that honestly was quite different than what we had initially envisioned. And architects are able to look at a school and see things that others are not. And if we have parents and staff sitting at that table and talking with the architect, and the architect can make proposals and talk about costs, I think it'll make a huge difference. So I'm very much in favor of following a sequenced process that makes sense, that we've used in the past to get community buy-in and engagement. And I really look at this kind of as a up to a 5-year plan. Of course, I would like to get things done as quickly as possible if there are immediate things to do, but I'm planning to be here for at least 5 years. Same thing with our assistant principal. We're really working on stabilizing the staff here. And I just see this $10 million as one of the pieces that is what we're going to do to help change the image of our school. And I really want to planfully move into this. And I have the time. There's lots of support here that we've gotten from the district, as far as administrative support, counseling support, restorative justice support. So I feel like as a principal, I sit in a very unique spot to be able to do some of this facilities visioning work. And it feels like the timeline of doing those interviews in November, having someone to the board by December, and in January, us putting together our committee, that is great. And honestly, I've needed to sort of take this process from a few folks who have taken it because there was a leadership vacuum in holding this process, and needed to say, no, we're not going to do that pet project because that's important to you, or that's important to you. We're going to really engage our community in what we want to do. And I'm so excited about this process, and I would really hope that the board and that this group would allow us to really move forward in a planful way, even though there have already been some things that John put forward that he felt somewhat in a rush to put forward. There's not a general consensus at this point, and I'd like to get there so that we can all be, if the field is what we're going to redo, which I think would be great, that's come up within a process and we all feel like, yes, great. And we have a ribbon cutting, and there was we had some blood, sweat, and tears in really thinking about that and weighing that out against other options and making that final decision. Just a quick example, at Rosa Parks, we were all set to turn that field into a turf field. I mean, that was really leading us in, and a lot more green schoolyard stuff. We were thinking of redoing the whole front of Rosa Parks and putting in kind of an artificial river. And we changed because we had an opportunity to put some hills in the kindergarten yard, a rock climbing wall. And when we compared all the costs, when we look at ADA, we made some different decisions. So that's where I'm at with the process right now.
Paco, I had no idea about the river.
Yeah, you may have had a river. Yeah, that could have been.
And I did engage with your architect about, I created a no list just for Rosa because of all the lovely, interesting things that you guys wanted. So
yeah.
But
Judy, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I think that sounds great, Paco. I totally understand you're wanting to like engage in a process with the community. And so I not that I'm going to be on the board for that much longer, but I would support that. I do think as far as the dollar amount that we came up was attached to the projects that were put in front of us. So my suggestion is that somebody maybe we put on the agenda for next meeting that John, you can, or John or Shanita or both of you or something can or Paco, maybe it would be you. I think Paco would be nice if you came to a board meeting, would be, to kind of give the presentation that you just gave to the whole board so that they all understand. And then kind of try to work with your community kind of within the 10 million range. But when it comes back, I think that I would suggest that the board be asked to approve however much it's going to cost for the proposals that the community comes up with, because the $10 million wasn't like a random amount. It was an amount attached to projects that were put in front of us by John.
If I may make a suggestion, President Appel, what I'd like to do is my intent is from our architectural pool to shortlist 3 architects from that, and then put together an interview panel, including Paco and some members of the stakeholder community there, to decide what architect works there. From that point, yes, we can talk about that we have this $10 million mark as sort of our jumping off point, but that's when we engage the community about really what not only is needed there, but about what is wanted there at Longfellow. From that, then we can look at it through a few different lenses of everything from giving the grand wish list, right, if you will, to tapering it down. And then once we understand what that looks like and what those costs look like, to your point, President Appel, that's what we could bring back to the board. That'll take time. That is a larger community engagement process, and I think that's the right way to do it. It's not necessarily, while the bond plan was created to really account for the dollars, the board never said in stone, right, this is the plan, it will not change. The plan is designed to be fluid. So with that, it gives the board the opportunity to move those dollars around, and it gives the board the opportunity then to really listen to the recommendations that come out of the Longfellow community, and pair that with what the architect can do for how much, right? And then the board gets to make that decision.
Yeah, so Executive Director Calise, I was wondering if you, at the time, I seem to remember there were some time pressures to why we were trying to make that decision when we did. So can you articulate those, or can you remind me what those were?
Yeah, it was just a lot of community. I think that probably the safest way to say it and the honest way to say it is just, I think the board was receiving a lot of community pressure about Longfellow at the time. As the initial working group that Dr. Evans had put together to sort of help create the bond list didn't put a lot on for Longfellow beyond what the infrastructure needs were. And because of that, there were definitely some pressures, and rightfully so, applied to the board and to staff about Longfellow. So it was asked of me, I believe in subcommittee, but it seems like forever ago. It was pre-COVID. I believe it came up in subcommittee, right, about trying to talk about, let's pick at what can we do? What can we do? Not necessarily in an easy way, but what can we do that would have a large impact on the aesthetics of the school, on the use of the school, and do it in a relatively short period of time, maybe a 2-year window or less. That's what drove the project list to become what it was understanding what the pressure was and understanding the desire of the subcommittee and the board of really to look at the time frame of when we could do it.
Yeah,
Shanita, did you want to chime in?
I
Oh, I'm sorry.
remember part of this conversation, and correct me, board members, board directors, if I'm incorrect, that there is also kind of a overarching middle school, looking at our middle schools and also looking at our assignment plans and also looking at Longfellow and trying to create parity amongst the middle schools in some sort of sense, because if there was overcrowding at Willard and John, these things may have occurred before you got here.
No, I do recall those conversations, but I don't think that they drove this. But go
Right.
ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me just interrupt for a second. So I think we need to remember that. So Paco, I really appreciate everything you said, and I don't. It's all a little frustrating because everything you said completely makes sense, and I understand it. And it's also true that this is about equity within the middle schools, and that the board voted to fast track $10 million worth of projects, specific projects, in the spring, for the reasons, Shanita, you just said, for equity reasons, because the Longfellow there was clear direction from the board to disproportionately invest in Longfellow because it needed it more than other schools, and because of also what Shanita just said, which is that the board has contemplated redoing the school assignment plan, and that there were some aspects of the projects that the board approved could sort of broadly be characterized as curb appeal, even though they're expensive. And part of it was sort of dramatically but quickly sprucing up the physical look of the school with an eye towards the possible redoing of our assignment plan, and making sure that Longfellow both was educationally but also physically as attractive a school as our other two middle schools. And the timing was, and it was, and I mean, again, everything you said, Paco, makes sense. And the 30% of the new staff, is a really compelling point. It was not just like, it wasn't, just so you know, it wasn't just sort of a handful of isolated teachers or parents. And, it was a pretty big group, particularly of staff that came to us. And it was also, and there was a process. Like, the frustrating thing is that it was, I think because of, maybe some of the leadership before you got here, it just wasn't a very robust process. But there was a process that the entire district went through, where every single school community had an opportunity to meet with our staff, meet with our consultant, and come up with the highest, priorities. And so it wasn't like John and Shanita just off the top of their head came up with a few good ideas for Longfellow. It was the product of essentially a not very good and flawed process, but a process that did happen at Longfellow. So I think, and the promise was that it would start really soon, that it would be started by now, and that it would be, those things would be completed within 2 years. So so to start so now this is it is a significant delay. I think we need to sort of recognize that it's a significant delay, and if that's what we need to do, then I guess we need to do it. But I think seeing as a 5-year vision makes sense for some things, but I think we need to think about things that can also be done within the next year or two, because that's kind of what the board voted on, and it is sort of what we promised the community.
So the one thing that I would say to
Wait,
that, Ty,
hang on
though,
a second, John. Shanita was going to say something.
Oh, I just want to make sure that I wanted to acknowledge Paco's point and also the board and the facilities, and just to try to bring it all together to say that there is a way that we can come about making some fulfilling the board's promise in terms of making sure that we can move forward with some of these things. But I also agree with Paco in a sense. We have to make sure we also engage our students as well. That's they are a huge stakeholder. And so just we as facilities, I know John Calizo will help us kind of reconcile these things, but I think that there is a way that we could, I'm a little bit more on the optimistic side of how we can make some of these happen.
so what I would say in respect to what you're asking, Ty, or what you're telling us, right, about trying to fulfill that and engage, and now unfortunately to contradict Shanita, what I would tell you is that if you want to go through this engagement process while it is a delay, I would encourage you to go through this engagement process prior to beginning the aesthetics work. And the reason for that is a lot of the work that was shortlisted based on the boards that we saw from the Longfellow process, a lot of that work was all of the work for that matter was on the exterior. It dealt with the field, it dealt with the fences, the gates, it dealt with the garden, things like that. Depending upon what the outcome of that engagement process is, if it were along the lines of modernization work, a lot of that shortlisted work that would go in, like a new field or new fences, would then actually become a product that it would ultimately be damaged or displaced during a larger project. So I would actually really encourage the President Appel, Vice President Alper, right? I would encourage you, and we can talk to the board as a whole if you'd like, but I would encourage you to, if we want to look at this from a much larger lens, which I agree with doing, then I think we do to some degree need to pump the brakes. Now, that's not to say that, you know, one of the big items that was always on the top of everyone's list for Longfellow was just the fencing around the field, was just that it's old, it looks awful, etc. We can do a smaller project of a fencing replacement where it's not with the concrete walls, it's not wrought iron, it's new chain link with filter fabric, something like that. But I would not get into doing these larger projects like redoing the garden per se and all the quad, or redoing the field, etc., until you know what the entire plan is, because you don't want to have facilities put the money out there only for it to become damaged, or for a redemising of the space to have to take it away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's hear. I think Vicki Davis wanted to give public comment. Vicki, are you? Can we just, Judy, are you okay with that doing?
Yeah, I was going to suggest the same thing.
Okay, because I think Vicki's also the president of the Longfellow PTA, and
Yeah.
that might be helpful to hear. Go ahead, Vicki.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, so I've made some chats and Q&A comments in regards to this. So in general, I've been at Longfellow a year and a half, and I only have a year and a half left there. So the idea of engaging students, the students that you talk to today are not going to be there when the work is done. This work has been requested over the past 5 years. So when I joined Longfellow a year and a half ago, there was already a committee of people who had been making these requests and working on these projects for the 3 prior years to that. So when we did our work last spring, there was before COVID, we had several meetings in person with the principal, with the consultant, with several parents. There were meetings with 30 to 50 parents in the room where we were discussing these things, and we made long lists of requests of things that we wanted. Based on those lists that were provided, John went through and came up with the short list of things that he thought were doable with this amount of money. The only thing that parents have consistently asked for that wasn't on that list is lockers, and the lockers were a bigger project for whatever reason that we didn't feel like could get done quickly. So I understand how Paco is saying that he wants to engage the Fuller community and the new teachers, and that he's making a 5-year commitment to being principal at this school. But the fact of the matter is the 8th grade parents who are there have been working for 3+ years. There's parents who are now in 10th grade who have been working on this and haven't done it. I've been there for a year and a half, and if we continue these delays, it's gonna, we're not even gonna begin talking until January. Work's not gonna begin until my daughter's in 8th grade. By the time it's done, I'm not gonna be at Longfellow anymore. And so these people that you're trying to engage to get feedback, every 3 years they turn around, and every 3 years you're going to have new people who want different things, and it's been an infinite delay. So I feel like I asked several times at our current board meetings what the delay was, and I was advised that it was because we did not have an architect. In the summer we were told that the architect would be here to begin planning in August, and I'm assuming because of COVID that did not happen. But if an architect is being hired once the board is approved on November 4th, there's no reason that following week we can't begin community engagement and immediately start talking with the architect. There's no reason we have to wait until
Okay.
January or further. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. John.
Hi, can I talk to the timeline real quick on that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so to your point, Vicky, yes, we had originally intended on having an August, our architects on board in August. Just honestly, with the capacity of everyone within the district dealing with COVID, that's why there was delays. That being said, the intent is not for the district to hire or to determine what our architectural pool is. And then based on my conversations with Principal Furlon, for us to say, okay, this is your absolute architect, this is who you're going to use. The intent really based on my meetings with Principal Furlon was that I would bring shortlist 3 architects to come forward to work with a stakeholder group that Principal Furlon helps put together to determine who the correct architect is for the Longfellow visioning and for the design or whatever the projects are. Understanding that, that's not a real time delay. That can happen relatively quickly after the architectural pool is awarded. But to just understanding how the district works, even if we were to award a contract to an architect on November 4th, you wouldn't have the architect there on November 9th. It takes at least a month to go through the process on both the consultant's end and on the district's end on the contracts to have everything signed, executed, and a purchase order to be put forth. What we're talking about essentially is to fast track this program in the sense of, yes, we'll have our architectural pool, we can shortlist the architects, we can get the interviews, but you'd still be looking at January when you think of what the time frame is and what the holidays are, unfortunately.
John,
are you guys talking about, I guess I'm wondering, Paco, what time, I'm going to just call you Paco, what time frame you're thinking of? Because I really appreciate what you said, Ty, and I also appreciate what Vicky said, and I appreciate what you guys have said. And so I think that, it seems like if there's going to be a process, which makes sense to me that there be a new process, although it's very helpful to hear that there has, and have Vicky remind us that there has been already. It's not like this wasn't developed with a process. These ideas came out based on a process. But like, if you want to start over, or I don't want to say start over, but if you want to kind of revisit the community, Paco, what kind of timeline were you talking about needing to be able to do what you would be, a process that you would be comfortable with?
Yeah. Well, first off, hi, Vicky. Good to have you on the call. And I was not aware of multiple meetings with 30 to 50 members of the PTA that had come together to develop a long list of priorities. And I was also not aware that the administration was working with the PTA in a multiple meeting kind of a situation. And that's not what I heard from John either. So I think there's just some difference in information there, which I don't know.
Akko,
what
why
I
don't
have,
Anita speak to that because she's been around for this whole time.
okay.
Oh, and so is John. I want to make sure that we are clear.
The side.
Paco, you guys did go through a whole, your school site did go through a Longfellow listening study exercise. But then on the other side of it, we were also doing our facilities master plan pieces where, you know, related to facilities, we did have a meeting at your space where we had a few people come in and attend and talk about
4.
that. But how many
That was
meetings?
it.
Yeah.
There were 4 people from Longfellow. That was it.
Yeah.
Okay, for the Longfellow meeting, I wasn't
yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
that's, you know, I'm sure everyone has taken an opportunity to look at the Longfellow listening study. I didn't see a lot of, I'm trying to pick my brain in terms of where the facilities items were there.
Yeah.
And
so the listening, the Longfellow listening campaign that was done by a couple of consultants and generated a 50-page report, that has a lot to do with current practices that are happening within our district.
Got it.
That are, you know, recommended to be changed, and then a lot of practices that are happening with our current leadership structure here at the school that were, you know, suggested to change, and then some things here on site with teaching practices, et cetera. There was very little to none in there about facilities, and those listening campaigns were really not focused on the facility. The facilities meeting that was had here that 4 people attended, that's what I don't want to base our plan off of.
Right.
And when I said I plan to be here for 5 years, that was meant to instill some sense of security that I'm not planning to leave, and neither is our assistant principal, and we really want to work. It does not mean that I am hoping that the plan will not be completed for 5 years. I would love to see this plan completed. I'd love to see a great plan completed as soon as possible. And honestly, my experience with Rosa Parks in a 3-month, you know, once or twice a month meeting with committees and the architect, we got $500,000 of work happening during the summer, and it was ready the next school year. I would love to see that here at Longfellow, and that would be my hope. And if we can get you know, a $2 million or $3 million project, you know, I'll be the first to thank you as a board to fast track any, you know, anything that we have. And I want to fast track community input. I want to fast track student input. We have advisory where we can do a quick student survey. We actually got great information from the survey that we did with kindergarten kids, you know, 5-year-olds at my other school. It's a great way to engage students, make them feel empowered. We have a leadership group here. So I want to do that, and I want to do all of this as quickly as possible. And as I outlined, I do have the time to do this, and I have experience with facilities. And to speak to the point of curb appeal of Longfellow, and, you know, attempts to bring it sort of on par as a choice in the district, there are things. This is a beautiful space. It is an absolute beautiful space. It is a small school, and it is, you know, when you walk down the bones of the building, the beautiful, I think it's oak hallways, the brand new cafeteria that we have, the central garden area is, you know, really amazing. We have great kind of natural. We have a huge field. There's great natural material to work with. What's been allowed is we kind of have a guerrilla gardening program where it looks kind of junky because there's not been any plan, and there's you know, overgrown pumpkins going up one way. The garden on one of our main streets has got kind of a huge amount of compost in it. I mean, there's not been any plan, and I want to make sure that we all know what we're doing as we move forward, and then we implement as quickly as possible. And I don't see that needing to take a really long time. But I do see us engaging our parents and our staff and our community. And I went around and I polled staff and I asked them, were you asked about a facilities plan here? Did you do any brainstorming on what that would mean to program? And I heard nothing. And what you know, my experience at Rosa Parks is Rosa Parks is one of the most beautiful, I think it's the newest school site in the whole district. And when I went there 10 years ago, it was one of the least desired schools to go to, even though it had tons of curb appeal. Instructionally, what was happening, what was happening was curricularly, what was happening was not where it needed to be. And parents were making decisions to go elsewhere. And I feel like these things need to go hand in hand. And I definitely think that facilities will make a boost, but a bigger boost here, honestly, is going to be our positive behavior system that everyone is tied into, our curricular offerings that everyone is tied into, and just frankly organization. And when someone comes to the front office, getting what they need and out in an efficient way. I mean, just what we'd expect anywhere.
Yeah.
So those things I think are also going to make a big impact.
So
Okay.
what I would recommend, oh, I'm sorry, Ty, were you going to talk?
No, I had one quick clarifying question, but do you want to go ahead with what you're going to recommend, or do you want me to ask that?
Yeah, go ahead and ask it.
Well, the thing I just don't quite understand, John, is so that I really appreciate all that, Paco. I don't understand why the community is the one picking the architect, or did I misunderstand that? Why would that be the case?
What I'm saying is that we can choose the architect, but on some projects such as this, where there is so much, look, I'll be very frank, we got zero participation through prior leadership from the Longfellow community when we did our facility master plan. There were 4 people in the room and I was one of them. Stacy was one of them. Okay. So that being said, we know that we never really heard the voice of Longfellow. So the reality is what my intent was for us to facilities to shortlist that architect, but then to work not with the community, but with Principal Furlon and some stakeholders, 2 or 3 other people from Longfellow to actually sit on an interview panel and actually help us decide who we envision to be the right architect. Because in this, since we're not telling the architect we want to do these $10 million of projects, or we're not telling the architect we want to do a major modernization, what we're telling the architect is we want to listen to the community. We currently have about $10 million earmarked for this school, but we understand that that may or may not be fluid. We need your help to really see the vision, right? And that's what Principal Furlon was talking about when he first started today, about just how architects, look, I'm good at making those visions, but I'm not an architect. I don't pretend to be, nor do I play one on TV, right? So it's about making sure that we have, thank you, Shanita, making sure that we have the right person for that job. That's all.
Paco, you have the best STEM middle school maker space.
Yeah.
You have the best STEM middle school maker space right now. There are a few different things that we may need to do, but again, on par, and we're working on the other middle schools to bring it to your standards. So you guys are there.
I agree.
Go ahead, Judy.
So I was going to suggest, look, Paco, we just brought you to the school and we trust your leadership. And so my inclination would be to go with your guidance, with your leadership. I would really, really encourage that it be that it be prioritized so that it doesn't take 6 months. I also would ask that, because one of my kids went to that school, and the people making the kind of decisions or recommendations that you're talking about we've heard tend to not be representative of the entire school body. Right. And so I just want to make sure that if we're going to spend the time doing this, that we're very, very conscientious and intentional about making sure to include the African-American Latinx parents. Because at least when I was at the school, I mean, my kid that went to Longfellow just graduated she would have graduated last year. And so I don't know. I just want to make sure that you, and I know you, Paco, so I know that's probably one of the things you're also thinking, even though you didn't say it. So I just want to make sure of that. And then given the fact that you follow our values, that you follow a process that's relatively expedited and is also inclusive, I would totally support this proposal to the full board.
Okay. Yeah, and just to that point, tonight we're having Club de Padre, which is conducted entirely in Spanish. We have those once a month. We have our African American parent group as well. So I want to run all these things by all of our parent groups and make sure that we have buy-in.
It's not that white parents, it's not that we don't matter. I definitely think like our voice also counts. It's just my experience has been that there's people kind of like me tend to feel more comfortable knowing how to access decision-making processes.
And I will assure you all that facilities is very big on inclusion. Right,
Okay.
John?
So can we, I don't know when it would be, and I don't know, I don't really have a strong opinion, but it seems like it should come back to the board since we did approve something different that has, and maybe it should be after you've thought about what exactly the timeline will be, so that it can come to the board with a new but firm timeline for a process and a plan that will come back to the board for
So
approval.
comfortably speaking, without knowing what Principal Furlon's schedule is like, but I envision the panel for the architect for Longfellow to have 3 members from the Longfellow stakeholder group, right? Principal Furlon, and then 2 of who he chooses, right? And then 2 from the facilities office. We can conduct those interviews the week of November 9th to November 13th. I can sort of preload a board item. And we can actually bring this to the board on the 18th, where Principal Furlon and I can talk about just this, why the re-envisioning, if you will, and also at that same board meeting, seek approval for the architectural contract moving forward with that architect. That being said, that architect's contract is going to be fluid, because what we're going to do is, so architects base their contract based on what the construction dollar amount is. So we're going to use $10 million as that marker, but we're also going to be, you know, I'm going to remind the subcommittee now that when it comes to the board, if the vision has grown, if that's what it is, then with that, the architect's contract will grow as well. There's nothing I can do to change that, but at least that allows us to get the right architect in place to possibly get them on board, right? And then if we have that approval in November, mid-November, what that'll do is give the architect realistically the time that they need to gather all of the information, all the technical pieces of information that they need about Longfellow, understanding it, so that either in late December, but I am a realist with the holidays, that come after.
You don't have to tell us the timeline now. I think it should just include whatever it is in November. It should include that clear timeline, because I think that I'm sorry to interrupt, but the community has been told one timeline that is not now being met. And it was the product of, I think we had 2 straight board meetings about it, and we were all pretty clear about it. So you don't have to say what it is now, but whatever, when you come back in November, I think it should be really clear and in writing, here's the timeline that we're committing as a school community and as a district to meeting.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I also think, you know, the 18th sounds great, because I do think it would be better to do with this current board, because you don't have to because there's going to be 2 totally new people on the board.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and that works
That's
for
great.
me as far as attending that board meeting, and also I can get 2 others along with myself for the interviews.
Great.
Thank you.
Paco, thank you so much.
Okay, do you need me for anything else?
No.
Okay, see ya. Good to see
Thank
you.
Hi.
And
Thanks,
thank
Principal
you
Furlon.
for bringing that back to us, because I also appreciate your basically humility and recognizing that we'll let Paco, thinking that there's a better way that we might want to do this.
Absolutely. I had concerns from day one about how it was being done, to be very blunt. And the reality is that he is the site leader. And, you know, to try to put a vision together or really address the needs of that community without understanding that community. They said the Longfellow meeting that happened, there were 4 people there. Myself and Stacy were 2 of them. And that meeting took place my very first week at BUSD. Right? Shanita had to draw on the map for me how to get over there. So, you know, I couldn't be a representation of that either. And not that I can fully be now, but at least I understand the school a lot better now than I did then. I just want to make sure that even though the board has given approval, that we're spending the dollars on the right things, right? We don't want to waste this money. We don't want to be frivolous. And we really do want to have a huge impact. And, you know, to Vicky's point, and I know to Robert's point on some things, we don't want these projects to take forever. That's not the intent. It's not to draw out the process. We definitely want it so that their kids benefit as well. But I don't want to do that at the expense of doing it right. I think if we're going to do it, we owe it to the taxpayers of Berkeley to make sure that we're doing the right job.
And if you feel, if all of your impression is that we haven't had input and we haven't had representative input, then doing it and trying to do it expeditiously would be, is great.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I'm
Good.
sure we could pull that off. And John is correct in terms of making sure that he's right in terms of whatever project we choose first to do, because lockers was a very big priority for them. However, if we do lockers first, then, you know, what does that mean? Do we have to move things out? Or if we do anything in the interiors, that means that we would have to put things out on the field. And so I understand how facilities works with just making sure that if we do a nice new field and not have to come back out there and tear it back up because we're doing work in the interiors. So that's important.
I agree. All of that is important, and spending the money. We obviously want to do what you said, John. It is also true that it matters when we don't do things we tell the community we're going to do, and we told them we were going to do something, and now we're not doing it. So, or we're doing it on a completely different timeline. So I think when in November, we should just be transparent about the fact that we approved something in the spring that now, with the benefit of new leadership and some reflection, we're changing. We're changing the timeline and we're changing the process, and we're going to do as fast as we can, as Judy said, but we think this is the responsible thing to do. But I think we have to acknowledge when we deviate from what we tell people we're going to do, because that erodes trust too.
Absolutely.
We have to acknowledge that COVID also played a huge part in our process in terms of getting the architecture pool online, all those things. So that COVID has really, and that's really what has set back a part of our process in terms of if we were able to. August was a clear month, but again, with COVID, the COVID delays were very much so, took a lot of time out of our staff. So we will acknowledge that.
Good.
Great. Should we move to the lease back?
Yeah, and this is just a really quick item that I just want both you and President Appel just to sort of be fully read in. So we have lease back going to the board, the GMP, which is the guaranteed maximum price, this coming Wednesday for approval for the Berkeley Community Theater. If you recall, we had split it into 2 increments to get through DSA. Increment 1 is complete, and what that is soft demo. So inside of that building now, the classroom wing is absolutely completely gutted. It's bare concrete walls, floors, and ceilings. Increment 2 came in, construction cost plus contingency of $43 million, which is more than what they had originally budgeted for several years ago, but it's absolutely in alignment with what the requirements are that DSA has put forth and the findings that were done during testing and during increment 1. What I want to bring to your attention, though, is we talked about when I had given the presentations over a year ago on why leaseback, what we had talked about was best value and not lowest responsible bidder. That is clearly represented here. And what that means is attached to the board document, what you'll find is the breakdown of what the GMP is, meaning all the subcontractor costs, and there's different subcontractors and different costs. If you really look into it, you're going to see that it wasn't always the cheapest subcontractor that was chosen for the contractor. What that plays to is extensive interviews with all subcontractors to find out, did they include A, B, and C? Many, oftentimes, well, we're not real comfortable on C. We didn't include that. It also represents history with the contractor themselves, meaning they know that they've hired Acme Plumbing, and I'll just use Acme because I'm thinking of the Roadrunner, right? And they know that historically they have been over budget or they've missed their deadline or whatever. So instead they've chose Bravo Plumbing, who maybe came in at a slightly different cost, but they know that there is not change orders with them. They know that the project can be done at times or can be done on the time constraints. Additionally, when you look at the breakout of the GMP, you'll see there's about 3 subcontractors that we're carrying an allowance for in our GMP to bond the subcontractors. Typically, we would not put a bonding requirement from the contractor to the subcontractor. This is being done only because what all of the best value interpretation and all of the interviews revealed was that, yeah, these really were the right companies, but because of concerns just based on history, it makes sense to bond them to ensure that it gets done on time and doesn't delay the whole project, which that turns into dollars, large dollars for us if there are delays. So, and even with the cost of the bond, it's still cheaper than going with the next bidder. Does that make sense the way I've explained that?
Mhm.
So I just wanted you two both to be up to speed so that if there are questions, you're able to answer them. I don't anticipate there will be, because we've done a lot of work in front of the board about this being based on best value. And we are getting a good value. I've spent the last few weeks value engineering this project further now that we're in an unoccupied status because of COVID. And we're working, even last week, we had meetings with DSA every day almost. I had meetings with the team every night after 5. And today we had a meeting earlier today with the fire marshal. So even though we're bringing forth this $43 million price, because it's a collaborative lease back, any savings that we're able to recognize through value engineering will actually come back through to the district. So it's not that the contractor saves money and he gets to pocket it. That 43 million is already a representation of nearly $1 million that we were able to value engineer off in the last 2 weeks. So being that it is unoccupied, we're taking advantage of that because we're able to actually reduce the requirements that DSA has put on us on several different things.
It's a great term, value engineering. I'm going to value engineer my life.
Well, in facilities, we do a lot of value engineering, but yes, it definitely goes beyond building and construction, Judy.
What, can you remind me the time frame? Is it one more school year?
No, August
Under
of
construction?
2022. So it'll be this school year and next school year.
This current one, and then the next one, and then the start of the next one will be open.
Yes, we should be open. We anticipate, and honestly, right now we're anticipating that we may even be able to shave a few months, but it's too early to say. But we anticipate being complete and open by August of 2022. And it's the intent of facilities, as I've mentioned at other meetings, that you guys had approved at the same time as Longfellow, certain of our marquee projects moving forward right as soon as we get our pool. So it's our intent that once our pool is up and running, to do an RFP for the Little Theater and to award that, because the amount of work that's going into the stage box of the community theater project plays directly to the symmetry of what's going to happen in the Little Theater. So ideally what will happen is as we're removing all the barricades from this community theater project, they wouldn't be driven and hauled off site, but those barricades would actually move to the other side of the campus so that we can begin construction on the Little Theater then.
And when is the Little Theater supposed to be finished?
So that we don't even have an architect for it yet. So it'll be a shorter time frame than 2 years, but I don't think it'll be a year. I think it's probably going to be about 15 to 18 months total time frame.
And maybe you just said this, but overlapping at all with that, or not starting
necessarily overlapping, maybe for the summer of 2022, but that would be the extent of it, because the impact of that overlap, the impact that would have on the campus would be detrimental to the campus. The campus is already, once we get into our post-COVID world and things go back to normal, right? That campus is so constrained for space that trying to do both of those at the same time, that we can do it, but the expense would be tremendous, and the impact that it would have would be really, really negative to that community.
It's too bad we're not doing it now.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things I wish we could be doing now.
Right.
What's that?
But I mean, like there's such a build-up process for us, and we can't just jump in and do it. So I get that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Oops, I closed out the agenda. Is there anything else on the agenda?
No, the only other thing would be next meeting date, and then we can adjourn if you'd like, or I can answer any other questions if there are any.
Well, when would you want to meet again? What?
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if we could have one more meeting before December.
Before December? Okay. Well, we can meet if you
Well, I mean,
just,
unless you feel like, I mean, my last day is December 2nd. So if you feel like it would be valuable to have one more meeting with the current, you know, committee members, then we should have it before December 2nd.
would you like to do one the day before so the intent is to award a Longfellow architect on the 18th. Would you like to do one the day before that, possibly November 17th?
Sure.
Let me make sure that that's not the days that I just committed to go out of town though. Hold on.
Exactly.
Let me open up my calendar real quick. I don't think it is, but I better make sure. That's not Thanksgiving week, right? November 7th. I can do the 17th. That's fine.
Okay, the same time works for me. Is actually the only time that would work for me, 1 o'clock.
Let's do it.
Okay, great. So November 17th, 1 p.m. for the next subcommittee.
And can we, I know that we obviously don't have the agenda
I
yet,
can
but can
do it at 1:30, Ty?
1:30?
Can you do it at 1:30?
I can do 1:30, yeah. I just can't, I can only do it to 2:30. So can we say 1:30 to 2:30?
Yeah.
Sure.
I know we obviously don't have the agenda yet, but if you can put the date and the time on the website so that people know in advance, that would be great.
Yeah. We can definitely get to work with web post to get that up.
Sure.
And then as I understood it, just to make sure, and I am clarified on my proposal on bringing forward how we're going to change, we bring soft costs. I don't have to bring that to the board as I understand that. That's just the change that we're making at this level, correct?
Right.
I believe
Okay,
so.
thank you.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right. Guess that's
Great
it.
job, Ty.
Well, thank you. All right. See you tomorrow, Judy.
See you tomorrow.
All right,
Bye,
I'll see
everybody.
y'all
Thanks,
tomorrow in the
John.
board
Thanks,
meeting.
Shanita.
Good to
Thanks,
see you.
Karen.
Bye,
everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.